Welcome back to another The Silver Bayonet Battle Report. Today we'll be doing a homebrew scenario that I cooked up for the month of Halloween. The forces of the Russians and the British will be facing off, entering this dark and dreary swamp for the hunt for the hag that lurks in these ruins. We have 4 points of interest on the board, which may hold useful things or terrible things, depending on what is found. So, that will have the Russians on this side, and the British will be coming in on this side. Alright, and here we have our Russian list, our warband. It is being led by Ivan, the officer. He has a fencing weapon, rifle, pistol, holy symbol, and oil and torches. And then following up we have Vladimir, the supernatural investigator. He has monster hunter, salt bag, silver shot, fencing weapon, and a pistol. 2 pistols. And then we have Victor, the werebear, with his heavy weapon. And then Grenadier Mikhail with a musket. And his brother Pavel, another grenadier. And a wounded Leonid infantryman. He's injured, starting off injured from the last fight that we had. So, with that, we'll take a look at the British force. And here we have the wonderful forces of the British Empire, led by Lieutenant Cunningham, with his hard to put down and inspiring. He has a pistol, fencing weapon, cold iron shot, and a holy symbol. And then we have his trusty veteran hunter, Sergeant Stark, with his indefatigable, hard to put down, rifle, fencing weapon, and he has a silver weapon. He's also has a nasty leg wound, which makes him a little slower. Next we have Hunts with Wolves, the native scout, who has Master of Cover and a musket. And then we have Malcolm McLeod, the Highlander. He has a heavy weapon and pistol. And then lastly, we have our 3 infantrymen there in the back. Private Anderson with the eye patch, Private Hill, and Private Moore. So, with that, let's begin the scenario. Alright, we have now deployed. I have the Highlander and 2 infantrymen on my left flank, Stark and the officer in the middle, Lieutenant Cunningham, and then the scout and another infantryman on the right. While on the infantry side, we have Brother Pavel on the right, with the Victor, the skinwalker, with the officer Ivor, I believe his name is, or Ivan, and then the infantryman on the Russian left, with the supernatural investigator and brother Mikhail on the left. So, with that, let's go ahead and roll initiative. See who goes first. That's a 5 for the British and a 4 for the Russians, as the British will get first activation. Alright, starting off, I activated Sergeant Stark, who moved forward, and now he's going to sprint towards that point of interest, since I don't think he has line of sight with those walls there. So, needing a 11 to move 4 inches. And that'll do it with a 12. And he'll be able to move to that point of interest to check it out next turn. Moving on. Alright, next up, Private Anderson moved forward, and he's going to sprint as well. So needing that 11. That'll do it. Gaining him 4 extra inches, which will get him right here at the edge of the swamp. And then we will activate our last unit for this phase. And my last activation is Malcolm McLeod, who's going to move forward and then sprint as well. And that'll do it. Getting him to this point of interest to check it out next turn. And with that, we go to, I believe, let's see, monster activations. Yes. Which there's no current monsters, so that we go to secondary players activation. Alright, first up, Brother Mikhail moves forward, and now he's going to try and sprint towards that point of interest. Needing an 11. No, he does not get it, so he only moves 2 inches forward. Moving on. Alright, next up, Brother Pavel moves forward and is going to try and take a shot at Malcolm. Needing a 13. He's a -1 to the modifier with a +1 accuracy, so this will just be a straight roll. And that's a 10, which will miss, and he will be unloaded. Moving on. Alright, next up, Victor moves forward, and being within inspiring range of the officer, is going to attempt to turn into a bear. Needing a 14 with a +1. And that is an 18. That'll do it, as Victor will turn into a bear. Alright, moving on. Alright, and then following up, everybody else just moved forward, going into the ruins in search of the hag. And with that, the British will activate the remaining units on the board. Alright, Private Hill moved forward and was going to attempt to do some shooting, but there's a tree in his way, so instead he's going to sprint. And that'll be enough. 4 inches, moving towards the ruins. Next up, Lieutenant Cunningham moves forward into the ruins and is going to sprint as well. Also going 4 inches towards the center of the ruins. Alright, and lastly, the native scout moved up into the bushes to get his cover bonus, and the last Private Moore moved forward and is going to sprint as well, also getting his sprint off, moving 4 inches, and we will go to the next round. And at the start of round 2, a thick fog spreads throughout the swamp, and out of the mist on either side, 2 revenants come stumbling into the area, summoned by the foul magic of the hag. Alright, let's go ahead and roll initiative for round 2. That's a 3 for the British and a 7 for the Russians, gaining the first initiative. Alright, for the Russians, she activated Mikhail, who instead of going for the investigating point, he turns slightly and takes a shot at Private Moore. Needing a 13 to hit. Ooh, and that's a 6 as the shot goes wide, as he's distracted by the 2 stumbling revenants coming out of the swamp. Next activation. Next up, Vlad the investigator moved towards the point of interest and rummaged around in there. And what did he find? With the King of Spades. And he finds an old leather-bound book. It must be the Hag's spell book. Gain 1 monster die, bringing her total up to 3 as we move on to the next activation. Next activation, she activated Brother Paul, who reloaded, or Pavel, my bad, and then moved up here to the wall to get a line of sight on my officer. And with that, we go to monster phase. Alright, and for the monster activations, these 2 revenants started lumbering towards poor Private Anderson as he's looking 2 dead soldiers in the eye. And then on the other side, one of the revenants was stumbling through the swamp water at a slower pace, but the other one makes its way towards poor Private Moore, as the British seem to be attracting the attention of the monsters. And with that, we go to British activation. Alright, first things first, McLeod here rummaged around at the point of interest, and he got the Ace of Spades. And what he finds, buried in a pile of bones, you find a torch. Gain fire with the melee attacks. So that should come in handy. And then with his movement, he's going to move towards the Revenants to back up Private Anderson. Alright, next up, Private Anderson is going to pull up his musket and take a shot at this Revenant here in the front. Needing a 12. He has a +1 to his accuracy. He has not moved. And that is an 8-9. That is a miss. I bet that other die would have hit, though. That's what I get for using her dice. Alright, he is unloaded. And he's going to stay there and not move. Moving on. Alright, next up, Private Hill here is going to point down over the wall and take a shot at this Revenant here. See if he can get the lucky hit. That'll be a +1. And that is a 9-10, which is still a miss, unfortunately. The infantrymen are not having any luck so far. Alright, moving on to the next one. Next up, Sergeant Stark here took a look at this clue marker to see what he finds, and he found the Queen of Spades, which is looking through a bundle of belongings. You find a delicious pastry. Gain 1 power die. Oh, nice little treat to keep me going. I'll take that. And then he's going to move deeper into the ruins. Next up, Lieutenant Cunningham moved forward and pulls his pistol out to take a shot at Pavel. So, needing a 13, I think. I have a +1 that gets nulled, and that's another miss with a 4 and a 3. Yeah. Unfortunate. The British are not on their game today, as he is unloaded. And then we'll move on to this side. Alright, next up, Private Moore will activate, and seeing that this Grenadier Mikhail takes a shot at him, he says, "Are you daft?" And then takes a look at the Revenant. Bugger that. Shoots back at him. And gets a 17. That will hit, dealing 7 damage to Mikhail. He's only got 11 health, so he has 4 remaining. And then after that, he's then going to back up away from the Revenant to not get attacked by it. Alright, and lastly, Hunts with Wolves, being the sensible man that he is, shoots at the Revenant coming towards him. 8 to 12, and that's a 6, which will miss, unfortunately. And then we will move on to the rest of the Russians' activation. Alright, and she activates the infantryman who moves forward to the wall and is going to take a shot at Lieutenant Cunningham. This will be a straight roll with a minus for the accuracy and the movement. And that is an 8-9, which will miss. And then we go on to the next activation. Alright, next up, Ivan moved forward towards the clue marker and investigate it, getting the Jack of Spades, which is, you find a cauldron with what appears to be eyeballs floating in it. Roll a courage check on the madness table. Ooh. Getting spooked by some floating eyeballs. We'll see what he does. Alright, go ahead and roll on the terror table. And that's a 10. A 10 is distracted. The figure suffers a -1 to all checks until the end of its next activation. Could be worse. So he'll luck out, and then we'll move on to the last activation. And lastly, the werebear moves forward into the ruins as we move on to round 3. And at the start of round 3, the mist begins to pool out of the ruins even stronger as the hag comes out of the darkness to see who is invading upon her territory. Let's go ahead and roll initiative. A 4 for the British and a 10 for the Russians, who will get the first initiative. Alright, start of the Russian activation. The werebear goes charging into Lieutenant Cunningham and is going to take a swipe at him. He is a +3 to melee in bear form. And that's a 4, 5, 6, 7, which will miss completely. And Lieutenant Cunningham will take a swing back. Getting 12 plus 1 for 13. What's your defense?
14.
14. We'll go ahead and spend a skill die to re-roll. And I'll take that. That was an 8. That would be 16 now, which will do damage. For a total of 8 damage, reduced by 2, I believe. Yes. Damage reduction 2. So he takes 6 damage on the bear.
Okay. He has 6 health left.
And I believe the bear will back up. We'll double check that and continue on. Alright, next up, Brother Pavel is going to take a shot at Lieutenant Cunningham. Let's see who he gets. What is that?
That's a 3.
An 8 and a 3 for 11 plus 1 for 12, which will miss, unless you want to spend a power die to re-roll that. Or if you want to save it for the hag.
I'm going to save it for the hag.
Alright, so that will miss, and we'll move on to the last activation for phase 1. Lastly, Ivan he moves up to the wall and then is going to sprint. There's a 9 and a 7, which will pass, gaining him 4 inches. If he hops over the wall, it will be, I think, reduced by half.
Oh, okay.
So, he's going to make his way towards the hag as he has a torch that can burn it. Alright, next up we go to the monster phase, which will start off with this Revenant attacking McLeod. And that's a 9, which will miss, even with the bonus to melee. And then McLeod will swing back, gaining him a 10, plus 2, which is 12, which I believe does hit the Revenant. I'll double check that. Alright, a 12 does does hit the defense, dealing 4 damage with a +1 for the heavy weapon. And then we'll move on to Private Anderson getting attacked by this Revenant. Go ahead and roll. 5, which will miss as well. And then Private Anderson will swing back, hopefully getting a hit as well. Nope. both of them fighting in melee, not doing anything. And then we'll move to the other side of the board to see what happens with those revenants. And on this side of the board, this revenant continues its march towards Private Moore, while this revenant turns and starts making its way towards what is his name again? Mikhail?
Yeah.
Yep. And with that, we'll go ahead and begin the British activation. Alright, and for the British activation, first thing I'm going to do is have Sergeant Stark to charge the hag to hopefully get the kill. So, with his fencing weapon, he's got a +2 to melee. No. Yes, he has a +2 to melee. And a swing, that'll be a 13. +2 for 15, which I will believe will damage. I'm going to re-roll the skill die because that is his... oh, no, I can't. I just already used it. Alright. We'll take the 3. As the hag will take 3 damage. Do I think it gets reduced? What do we got here? Defense 12. Damage reduction 3. Okay, so Sergeant Stark does deal some damage, but it doesn't do enough to hurt the hag. And then the hag will take a swing back. And the hag will roll 8, 4, so that's 12. With nothing, no zeros, so that will miss as Sergeant Stark blocks the hit. Yes, you can. You can re-roll a die.
Okay.
So she's going to go ahead and spend a monster die, re-roll that skill die. And a 7. That'll definitely do it for 15 and 8 damage to Sergeant Stark. Oof. I'm going to spend a power die to try to negate that. So, needing a 10 or reduced by half. Reduced by half it is. So 4 damage goes to Sergeant Stark, bringing him down to 8 health left. Next up, Lieutenant Cunningham will charge at the bear again to try and strike him down. He'll get a -1 for the fatigue. That is a miss, unfortunately. And then the bear will get to swing back.
Okay. +3.
So that's 11, 12, 13, 14, which will hit Lieutenant Cunningham, unfortunately, dealing 4, 5, 6 damage to Lieutenant Cunningham. And he's going to take that. And then we will move on to the next activation. Next up, Private Hill is going to reload. And then he's going to move towards the hag to help out Sergeant Stark. Next up, Malcolm McLeod here is going to pull out his pistol and try and shoot that revenant in the face. And that's a 9 +1 for 10, which won't do the damage. I'm not going to spend that power die. So with that, after shooting, he's then going to make his way towards the hag. And then Private Anderson, he reloaded and backed up from the revenant, making his way towards him. And then we move on to the other side of the board. And lastly, Private Moore and Hunts with Wolves backed up 6 inches and reloaded their muskets as the revenant starts making its way towards them. And then with that, we go to the rest of Russians' activation. Alright, and for the Russians, Vlad comes up the hill and is going to take a shot at the hag with his pistol.
I have a +1.
I had a -1 for moving. So that is 10, 11, which will just miss unless you want to re-roll with a power die or a skill die.
Yeah, I'll do a power die.
Okay. Re-rolling using her only power die. Getting an 8 for 16. That will hit. Dealing 8 damage, reduced by 3 for a total of 5 damage to the hag. Reducing its health by 5 down to 9. Good shot.
Yeah.
For the supernatural investigator. Alright, moving on. And lastly, Mikhail comes running up the hill as well and reloads. And this infantryman, I forget his name, he hops the wall and reloads his musket. And with that, we move on to round 4. Before we go to round 4, we forgot to activate the hag during the monster activation. So, she's going to go ahead and activate by throwing a potion at Sergeant Stark. Getting a +2 for accuracy. Ouch, that is a 6 with a 7, so 12, 13, 14, 15, which will hit Sergeant Stark, dealing 6 damage to Sergeant Stark, bringing him down to 2. I'm going to use my other power die to negate that. You know what? Nope. I'm going to take it.
You're going to take that?
I'm going to take it.
Oof.
Bringing me down to 2. And then I have to make a courage test to from taking a potion. And if I don't meet if I fail the courage test, something will happen. 7, 8, 9, 10. I think that'll pass, but let me check. Alright, the target number was 12, and he has no courage buffs and only +1 from the officer, so he does fail. And with the potion splashing onto Sergeant Stark, he puffs in a puff of smoke and turns into a toad that he will try to get out of transforming back next round as we move on to round 4. Alright, initiative, round 4. A 2 for the Brits and a 7 for the Russians, as they will go first. Alright. Lord Ivan rushes forward with his torch and sword in hand as he tries to slash at the hag. Go ahead and roll. So you got a buff to melee?
Just 1.
Just 1, so yeah. That'll be 16, which will hit, dealing, he has a fencing weapon?
Yes. Yep.
Dealing 8 damage to the hag, bringing it down to 1, except for I'm going to spend my monster die to try to negate that. Because I want the kill. Ooh, that's a 10! That's a crit! The hag negates all of the damage from the swing.
How could you?
And then the hag's gonna swing back at you as you just try to light it on fire.
I'm trying to help you out.
And that is a 10, which I will miss on the officer as he backs up, taking a fatigue. Sergeant Stark is a toad. He doesn't need help anymore. But he still wants to kill. Alright, moving on. Next activation. Next up, the werebear is going to take another chunk out of Lieutenant Cunningham.
Yeah.
Oof.
Juicy chunk, it looks like.
Yeah, I'd say. So that'll definitely hit with... and I have 1 power die left to negate that, I'm going to. Or else Lieutenant Cunningham's going bye-bye. A 6, so that'll fail, so he only negates half the damage. Which is 9, 10, 11. So...
It's 3. Extra 3. So 1
no,
would be 12?
it's just plus 2.
Oh, okay.
Which is 11, which negates, I believe, rounded down. Which means he will take 6 damage, I think. Let me double check. Alright, the wounds is rounded up, not down, so he has 1 wound remaining. And then he's going to swing back at the bear. Getting a 12 plus 2 for 14, which will hit. With a... But unfortunately, that's damage reduction on the bear, I believe. So I don't think he'll take any damage. And with the damage reduction 2 for the bear, he does no damage while Lieutenant Cunningham continues to get mauled. And for the Russians' last activation on phase 1, Leo is going to take a shot and try and finish off Lieutenant Cunningham with the musket. And that will miss completely. And then he will get to move if he wants. Alright, and for the monster activation, the Revenants started moving towards their respective targets, slowly but surely, as they are pretty slow. That guy's stuck in a swamp over there. And then the hag is going to throw a potion at Lord Ivan. And that will hit.
Can I use my monster die to make you roll that?
I think you can. Let me double check. Alright, she's going to spend a monster die to make me re-roll the skill die. And that is a 6, which I think still hits with a plus 2 to the range, to accuracy. So, what we got here? 14, 15, 16. Which will penetrate his defenses as you take 6 damage. Unless you want to try to negate it.
Would be this?
Yes, you have 1 left.
Yeah.
You're going to?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, go ahead and roll a die. 1. Okay, so you just take 3 damage instead. Bringing you down to 9, correct?
Yeah, 13, yep.
So he has 13?
Yeah, he has 13.
And it'd be 10. Alright. And then you need to make a courage test. To see if you get turned into a toad. Or some other foul pest.
Okay.
2 dice.
I have 3 courage.
Plus 3 courage, okay.
Yep.
What is that? So 1 and a 3, so that
7.
fails. As you get turned into a creature as well. And then we move on to British activation. And Lord Ivan is turned into a beetle. While Malcolm climbs over the rocks and makes his way towards the hag, and then reloads. And then Private Hill, he's going to take a shot at the hag with his musket. And that will just hit with a 12 plus 1 for 13, dealing 3 damage, which is reduced. So it does 0 damage to the hag as he is unloaded. And then we'll move on to Lieutenant Cunningham, who's going to run away from the bear and reload his pistol. There's Lieutenant Cunningham backing up from the bear. And then Sergeant Stark's going to attempt to break his curse. Needing a 12. And that is an 8. He remains a toad. And then we'll move on to Private Anderson, who's going to take a shot at this Revenant. Actually, he'll take a shot at this one, since it is injured. And that is an 8, which will miss. And then he will make his way this way, keeping away from this Revenant. Next, Private Moore moves over here, gets a line of sight on the hag, and takes a shot. And that will hit, even with a -1, dealing 9 damage to the hag, reduced by 3 for a total of 6 damage, putting the hag on 3 wounds left. As anybody has a chance to finish it off. And then we'll move on to my last activation. And lastly, Hunts with Wolves moves down as well, and unfortunately doesn't have line of sight on the hag, but he does have a bear that he's going to shoot. Try and get revenge for Lieutenant Cunningham. And that'll do it. That's a 16, even with the +1 and the -1. Yep. So 16, which will hit for damage 8, reduced by 2 for 6 damage to the bear, as the bear gets knocked out. And you have no more dice to negate the damage as the bear gets taken out.
That's sad.
First casualty. We'll see if he suffers a permanent injury or death at the end of the game. And with that, the Russians get to make their rest of their activations. Alright, and for the Russians, Vlad moves forward and pulls out his other pistol to try and take a shot and finish off that hag. That's a 10. Does he have any bonuses? Accuracy?
No.
No.
He has +1, but I moved, so.
Alright, that will miss then, as the missile or the shot goes flying wide. And then we move on to the next one. Next up, Brother Pavel's going to try and take the shot at the hag as well. And that'll do it. That's 8, 14 for damage 8.
Another 5.
Yeah. So it was on 4. It was on 1, wasn't it?
It was on 3.
3?
Yeah.
Okay, that will take the shot of damage reduction of 3, 5 damage, as the hag's head gets blown off by Brother Pavel as he gets the kill.
Nice.
Breaking the curse of the hag, as Sergeant Stark and Lord Ivan, turn back into their human selves as they stare each other in the eyes, all wide-eyed, as we move on to the next activation. Alright, and lastly, Brother Pavel reloads his musket and makes a retreat towards the board edge to get off safely, as the hag has been slain. And with that, we go to round 5. Alright, let's go ahead and roll initiative. And that is a 10 for me and a 2 for her, as British get the initiative. First things first, Lieutenant Cunningham retreats backwards 6 inches and then is going to try and sprint off the board. There's a 5, that won't do it, so I'll just get him 2 inches to the board edge. And then we'll move on to Sergeant Stark. Sergeant Stark, shaken from being turned into a toad, is going to retreat as well and try and sprint. 9 inches, which plus 2 is 11, that will succeed, as he will fall back another 4 inches. And for my last activation, McLeod backs up 6 inches and then pulls out his pistol to fire at... Actually... Yes. He will take a shot at Brother Pavel with the pistol. That is... Let's see, does he have... He's got +1 accuracy, which is negated for moving. So that is 12, which I think hits.
14 defense for the...
14?
Yeah,
for the Grenadier? Alright, that will miss. And then we will do monster activation. Alright, this Revenant starts making its way up the hill towards the ruins with all the Russians. This one's continuing his chase of Private Anderson, along with that one, and this Swamp Revenant finally makes it out of the sludge as we move on to Russians activation. Alright, and for the Russians, Brother Pavel falls back 6 inches and is going to try and sprint. And that'll do it, as he'll get an additional 4 inches of sprint. Continuing on, the Vlad, the Investigator, is going to fall back as well. Only going 2 inches with his sprint. And then next up, Leo is going to move 6 inches back as well, as it seems the Russians plan to fall back. 10, that would just be another 2 inches. And then next, who do we got next?
This guy.
The lieutenant, or the officer, 6 inches to the board edge. Gaining another 4 inches with his sprint. As the Russians make their escape towards the board edge. And that'll end the Russian. This guy will, Brother Pavel?
Yeah.
Mikhail? Whichever one.
Whoever.
He will get off the board safely. And then it'll go to the rest of the British activation, and they will make their way towards the board edge as well, trying to escape. And they should escape just fine, as that will end this scenario. Alright, and to calculate the points, the Russians get 2 experience points for destroying the hag, and additional 2 experience points for searching 2 clue markers, for a total of 4, while the British get 2 experience points for searching 2 of the clue markers. So, with that, we then check the injury table to see what happens to Victor. So go ahead and roll 1 die. A 4. Slow recovery. The figure will start the next game at -3 health.
He's alive.
He's alive but injured. Alright guys, and that will bring the end to this scenario, the hag hunt. Thanks for watching guys.